Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Welcome to the second most highly anticipated event in the month of December, the Worcester County Public School Budget Input Meeting. And for everyone in attendance, Christmas is coming early this year because I'll have not just one but two presentations for you. So you must have been really good this year, okay? I'm going to start off with the blueprint presentation. As you want to advance, Karen? As everyone, I'm sure here, knows about the blueprint, right? But just in case you don't, I'm going to take just one slide and talk about what the blueprint is. The blueprint is Maryland law that was passed, and what it's supposed to do is improve the quality of education for all children in Maryland. And it has 5 pillars. Right now, Dee is our blueprint coordinator. Dee Swart, she's overseeing the blueprint for us. And the superintendent has assigned a staff member for each pillar. So for pillar 1, Ms. Schwartz is also overseeing that. It's early childhood. That includes pre-K related blueprint requirements. Pillar 2 is being overseen by Dr. App. That's high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. And the 2 things that are in there that are real important are the $60,000 starting teacher salary that we have to get to by FY27, which is 2 years from now. Right now we're at $52,789. We got to get to $60,000 in 2 years. Also in that pillar is National Board Certified Teachers. As you know, when you receive NBC status, you receive additional $10,000 in funding in your salary. Pillar 3 is being handled by Dr. Wallace. That's college and career readiness pathways, including CTE. And 2 items in there are the dual enrollment and AP courses and the CTE programs that we offer at the technical high school. Pillar 4 is being handled by Lauren Williams, and that's resources to ensure every student succeeds. And Pillar 5, which is one we're going to talk about tonight, is governance and accountability. And included in that pillar are to make sure all the reports are being filed properly, to make sure we're receiving stakeholder involvement. And the real big one in Pillar 5 is resource allocation. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So Pillar 5 is huge. It's going to bring extensive operational financial challenges. It's going to require multiple players, both inside and outside the school system, to make it happen successfully. Those players include the Worcester County Board of Education, the Worcester County Government, the Maryland State Department of Education, and the Accountability and Implementation Board, or AIB. We're all going to have to work together as we implement the blueprint successfully. So I wanted to give everybody a little history lesson. I've been here a long time. I know all this. Back in 2003 or 4, Maryland passed the Thornton funding. Does everybody remember Thornton funding?
Yeah.
Beth does. Okay, Beth. It's also a bridge to excellence, okay? So what happened with that funding is MSD would send funding to the local school systems, right, based on a wealth-based formula based on enrollments. K-12 enrollment, special ed, comp ed, and multilingual learners. The county funding was, the baseline has always been maintenance of effort with the county. That's the sort you have to give us, okay? That was bridge to excellence funding. So we get the money in that manner, and then we spent the money, and we had to report back to MSDE in 15 budget categories. That's how we reported our expenditures under Bridge to Excellence. Now we're moving on to the new blueprint funding, and there's some really key differences in this on the way they handle the blueprint funding. MSD still sends local school systems funding based on a wealth-based formula. It's still driven by enrollment in K-12 form, special ed, and ML. The county governments now have a floor of either maintenance of effort funding or the local share. Each of the blueprint programs has a per pupil amount associated with it. You'll see that later in my presentation. And that has a local share and a state share. So what they do is they add up all the local shares and get a total, and you look at maintenance of effort, and the greater of those is the floor that the county has to provide. On the expenditure side, which this is a huge difference, okay, we have to report back on how we spent the money by blueprint program. Okay, and it also has to be allocated by student to the school that student attends. 75% of the blueprint funding has to be tied to the student at the school they attend. And I'll show you more about that in a future slide. We talk about this wealth-based formula. And just to give everyone an example of how that impacts Worcester, this is National Board Certification I talked about earlier. When a teacher receives NBC, Blueprint says they get $10,000 extra added to their salary. And it's supposed to be split between the county and the state. Well, in Worcester County, because we're considered the wealthiest county in Maryland, we get about $2,400 of that $10,000 from the state. So our county's got to pick up $7,600 of it. In Caroline County, which is the highest poverty county, they get about $9,300 from the state, and their county pays about $700. So do you see how that wealth-based formula really impacts? Our county's got to pick up, $7,600. Caroline County picks up $700 of the $10,000. So that I want to demonstrate how that worked. No, you're fine, Carrie. Carrie is my wonderful assistant, Elaine. Thank you, Carrie. This slide shows the mandated blueprint funding programs by statute. So if you ever get bored and want to look up and read about each one, you can certainly do that. But that's the statute that references each blueprint funding area. The blueprint major funding categories, okay, is foundation, comp ed, which is free reduced meal students, multilingual learner, special education, and pre-K. And under each one is an amount. These are FY25 amounts. So for foundation, which means your basic student, you're supposed to spend $8,789 per student. That's state and local share both. That's the combined amount. For comp ed, if it's a comp ed student, you add on $7,559. If it's a multilingual learner, you add on another $8,965. Special education, you add $8,701 more. And then pre-K is kind of separate because that's a separate count, but you get $13,000 per student for pre-K students. And underneath each one of these, we have to allocate costs, as I said earlier, to each one of these funding streams. So right now, we're thinking, this is all a draft because it could change, but under foundation, we're thinking basic classroom teachers, administrators, secretaries, student services positions, technology, materials of instruction, those kind of things would be under basic foundation funding. Comp ed would include additional classroom teachers, additional student services positions, interventions, and after-school and summer school. Under multilingual learner, it would include additional classroom teachers, ELL teachers, translation expenses, those types of things. And special education would include special education teachers, special education assistants, occupational and physical therapy, speech, and materials of instruction. And of course, pre-K can only cover pre-K teachers and pre-K assistants and materials of instruction. And besides the blueprint and the costs associated with the blueprint and implementing that, we still have inflationary pressures on our operating budget. We have transportation costs that continue to increase. Utility costs continue to increase. Health insurance continues to increase. The blueprint takes none of that into account. So that's on top of everything else that we have to absorb with the blueprint. Those costs are going to continue to go up in our budget. How are we going to come about implementing the blueprint? Well, we're going to have to review every expenditure account and associate it with a blueprint revenue stream. Okay, that's very labor intensive, but that's what we have to do. And we're going to use the Maryland State Department of Education Teal book. It's a financial manual. And also they came out with some guidance on the Baby Blue book about a year ago. We're using that too. And we're going to have to allocate the budgets and expenditures to schools. I mean, a lot of these expenses, like central office expenses, like the finance office, HR, payroll, the superintendent's office, technology, maintenance, those things have always been budgeted here and expensed here at the central office level. We're going to have to now break those out and allocate those to schools to meet the blueprint. Utilities have always been budgeted centrally. We expense them to the school. We don't actually budget to the level of the school. The blueprint is going to require us to budget them to the school level. Next slide, Gary. So what are we going to do? We're going to go through and we're going to look at the objectives that we have in our ESSA consolidated plan and our blueprint implementation plan, and we're going to use that as a guide as we go through and make these decisions. And we're also going to have to look at models of staffing, because at some point this is probably going to require us to relocate and move staff from one school to the other to meet that 75% of the funding following the student. Next slide, Gary. And this is, I think, is a good example that I think everybody can understand. So if student A is just a regular student, not special ed, not comp ed, not multilingual, $8,769 is the amount allocated through the blueprint. And student B, they're also a comp ed student, free and reduced meals. So you add on $7,559 for that, and now you're at $16,348. If student C is also multilingual learner in special education, you allocate $34,014 to that student. So what this is saying, and this is it's not going to be a real case, but just to make it simple. Suppose we had 2 elementary schools in Worcester County, and they both have 300 kids enrolled in those schools, right? The elementary school A has 300 students, right? That means I'm going to allocate about $2.6 million to that 300 student school. Elementary school B has 300 student C's enrolled at $34,000 per pupil. That would mean I would allocate $10.2 million to that school. So 2 elementary schools side by side, both have 300 kids enrolled. One's getting 2.6 and one's getting 10.2. That's what the blueprint says. And that's why I say at some point in time, it might require this board to relocate staff to other schools to meet that requirement of the 75% of the funding following the student. The timeline for implementing this allocation, FY25, the year I'm in now, is a baseline. We're working now to get where we are, to see how close we are to the 75%. Any gaps, we got to reduce by 50% in FY26, which is next budget year. And by FY27, we have to be fully implemented with 100% of students attending schools, with 75% of the allocation of the funds following the student. These are some additional resources and information that you can look up and find out more information about the blueprint.
So a significant part of the blueprint is also gathering stakeholder feedback on how we are implementing the blueprint. So Mr. Tolbert just gave a wonderful overview about Pillar 5. So what we'd like to ask everybody in attendance tonight, if you don't mind whipping out that cell phone, and those on our live stream, hopefully this slide is up for you so you can also participate. But we'd love for you to be able to, it's a single question that you're going to answer. It's an open-ended question just about, now that you kind of have a baseline education on what Pillar 5 entails, what are your budget priorities to share with this board in terms of not only our blueprint implementation, but our budget process moving forward. So if you don't mind just taking a moment, I will leave this up for just a brief second so everyone can scan it, and then we will move on. Thank you.